We got our one item, our mental health discussion, so I don't know if Matt, you're going to lead us off or kick it right off to
Yeah,
the floor.
I'll just give a little opening here. So,
It's all good. Me too.
yeah, tonight we have our work session on mental health discussion, and so Director Daly is going to talk to us a little bit from an overview perspective. You guys have seen the document that's uploaded in board docs before. I also started the kind of board update with you today. It's pretty bare bones right now, but it is linked in there too if that's easier for you to find through your email. It's the same document. It's pretty extensive in there. Laura's going to hit a few of the high points and then talk about some of the plans for the work group, and then of course give you guys a chance to answer any questions you might have or clarifications as she goes through that. So it'll probably help her target, some of her information to you if you do have questions as we go throughout. I think she's okay just jumping in, right, Laura?
Yeah.
As they have them. So
Yeah.
we don't mean to talk at you the whole time, but there is a lot of information in there, and I think part of what you hear her say is we want people that participate in that work group to have some foundational understanding of what the current playing field is and what the current reality is in our district, and then also, of course, we're always looking for areas of improvement and things we can continue to do better. So with that, it's Laura's show.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. Also, Corinne Frank, our learning supports coordinator, wanted to be here tonight, and she gave me permission to share that she actually is down with COVID, and so she just wasn't able to join us. Otherwise, she would really want to be here and just help, facilitate the conversation and be a part of problem solving and identifying solutions. And I'll touch base with her tomorrow and just share with her things we talk about tonight. So as Superintendent Degner said, I know it was back in March when he just sort of asked for an overview of a variety of things related to SEBH, social emotional behavioral health. So our learning supports department team that works to provide SEBH supports for the district created this. So you've seen this before, so don't feel as, if you looked at it, don't feel as though it's all new material or information. And what I'll do tonight is just give a couple little high-level points at the top of the document, because the top of the document has more to do with our universal core supports that we're providing and the professional development just from this year that you've already heard updates about. So I don't want to repeat any of that, but if you have questions about it, we can talk about that, because really my main points, to just go right into it, are that anything that we're providing around what we would call direct mental health supports in schools, the foundation of that is having healthy classroom environments and healthy school environments for social emotional learning and embracing that. And so the more we can do to help the teachers, the staff, the principals, help everyone in our district just with building their capacity and that continuous improvement lens to continually support students, we need to have that foundation. And so the top of the document, really the first couple pages, has just a summary of all of those different professional development series that our department provided just this year. And it was a continuation, as you know, of the equity department's professional development that they started and got really the ball rolling for last year. It's really quite beneficial that all of these effective classroom practices that we're providing information on, and we see a lot of teachers doing a great job implementing across the district, is just leading quite nicely into the high reliability schools. So as you're learning about the high reliability schools framework and that model, that supportive, collaborative, that first foundational level, I would like to say that we 100% knew we were going to do high reliability schools and we planned all of this. However, it just goes to show that, I think HRS was on the radar at some point, but yet we didn't develop this specifically for high reliability schools. But I think it does help us really drive that point home, that the evidence-based classroom practices that help build relationships and get to those higher levels of learning. That's what we want. We want the engagement, those higher levels of learning, the academic mindset with culturally responsive classroom practices. It just kind of fit nicely. It's just kind of feeding right into, as schools next year start to work on level 1 foundational. So And I think, someone else can tell me differently, but I've been in the district more than just a hot second. So, even my time as a principal as well as in the role that I'm in now, I really think this might be the first time that as a district we've said these are the effective classroom practices that are evidence-based, that support social emotional learning, that are culturally responsive. Let's not do 400 things, let's do a few things really well. And so that's really kind of been our mantra and our goal with a lot of this professional development is you don't have to try it all, just do those high leverage practices really well. Build upon what you're already doing because there's so many great things happening in the district, and we tried to highlight that throughout a lot of our video clips and examples as well. So that's really that first part, and then flowing into what we have in place for the social emotional learning curriculum. We've had a social emotional learning curriculum at the elementary level for years, maybe even decades. That's been a long-standing level of support. Our school counselors have always been the ones that are delivering that in the classrooms. So sometimes you hear it referred to as our guidance curriculum, but it's the same thing. It doesn't have to be taught by school counselors, but that's just the model that we have used at the elementary level. And then at the junior high level, we actually implemented this during the pandemic. We just thought, why not? Let's go ahead and implement an SEL junior high curriculum. And so there's been some good implementation of that, and also a little bit of inconsistent implementation across the district, and that's probably because of the timing that we implemented it. But it's a really good bank of resources for our, it's actually 4 middle schools as we move to the middle school model, fun fact. And so it's for 6th through 8th graders. And it's just a really good bank of scope and sequence of lessons and resources to help promote social emotional learning. And then at the we plan to continue that. And then at the high school level, we hadn't had a SEL curriculum in the district prior to just this year. West is piloting a curriculum that they chose on their own independently. It's called Respectful Ways. And then Tate also is piloting a curriculum this year called School Connect, and they're really liking that. And then I guess for a couple years we have had the Mentors in Violence Prevention curriculum. That is an SEL curriculum, but it's focused on bystander education. So it is really kind of upstander education. What do you do to try to prevent acts of violence or bullying or harassment? And it's really focused more on peers helping peers. And so we'll continue to implement that, but we want to also look for a little bit more of a robust universal SEL curriculum to complement that. So those are some pieces that we have in place for our SEL curriculum. And then it's really important to note that during the course of this past school year, our normal curriculum review cycle, just like we do math, social studies, those curriculum review cycles, the SEL curriculum was up for review. And Lindsay Schleckebeer, who is our school counseling coordinator, she also is she's 0.8 school counseling coordinator and 0.2 health coordinator as well. She implemented that process. I think you were on that. Yeah, you served on that committee. And because we knew that we needed to take a look at just the current status of our school counseling K-12 program, we decided to incorporate with the SEL curriculum review, the school counseling program review within that. And to just look at the strengths, the needs of the school counseling related to best practice, and then also to tie that along with the SEL curriculum review process. And so Lindsay is working on a document that just has the summary and outcomes of the recommendations and the recommended action steps from that. Fun fact, if you want to go to the DPO meeting tomorrow, she will be providing a presentation about that. So she's probably working on it tonight. So I don't have that linked in here right now, but I know she's working on that. And if you have questions or want to know more about that, in the coming days, we can definitely come back another time and talk about what were the outcomes of that SEL curriculum review process and school counseling program review as well. And then, as you know, we have implemented a universal SEBH screener, both at the elementary starting at 2nd grade, on up to 12th grade over the span of the last 2 years. And we plan to continue to do that. And that is one of the tools that is directly from students about how they, at that point in time, it's just a screener, it's not diagnostic, but it's a screener that tells us at that point of time, from the student's perspective, how are they feeling social and emotionally. And it gives us great information, and we are just probably scratching the surface of how we can use that data and that information to better our students' experiences and use it as a convergence of data, because we wouldn't ever want it to just be, oh, at this one point in time, this student, reported they were feeling, a certain way, whether it's high or low. And, but that along with, our culture climate survey information, comparing that with academic and achievement data, along with attendance data, there's just so many ways that we can use that in a rich way. And we've really tried to be pretty persistent with our building staff and helping them understand, yes, you can use this data to inform interventions or layered supports that you may want to implement for students, but use that with a bit of caution, because again, it's not diagnostic, it's one point in time. It helps us know how that student was doing then, and then you look for trends and patterns over time. That's kind of the nice thing about implementing it 2 or 3 times a year as well, like over the span of grade levels. And then the other thing that we really are trying to be persistent about is use that information to see what your data is telling you about what you need to strengthen in your universal core. So, were 70% of your students saying they were feeling like they didn't have a sense of belonging? Well, then what does that tell you about how you could try to implement some more community building experiences for students? Or you can break it down demographically as well and look, are these our English learners that are saying this? Or these are FRL students? Are these, different other categories of students that we look at when we do our disaggregation of data? And so that is a little rundown of the screener that we've implemented over the last couple of years. And then we're getting down to, I believe, the main focus for today, just to focus more on supports and services specifically related to mental health. And I appreciate you giving me that time to just lay that foundation of that information up front, because all of what we're going to talk about probably for the next, half hour, 45 minutes is really based upon the health of those universal classroom and school supports and services. And so I'll pause for a second, I guess, just to see, it's probably good teaching and facilitation to just see, does anybody have a question about any of that so far, because then I want to get into the GEAR grant and move on from there.
I have a really simple question.
Yeah.
The junior high one, it says to be taught to all 7th and 8th. Did you say we started it this year?
We started it a year before this.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So anything else? Not yet? Kind of chomping at the bit.
I could ask lots of questions, but
Yes.
also mental health.
Yes, yeah. So, and at any time, really, like Matt said, just ask away, because, anybody's question might be something everyone else is thinking, or it might be a timely time to chime in, so feel free. So related to the GEAR grant, so this was an infusion of money from the Iowa Department of Education that was specific to providing mental health services in schools. And we took the opportunity, this was last spring, right about this time last spring, when Corrine submitted the grant. And really she gets a lot of credit for the content of the grant and what she submitted, worked with a couple team members, but she really led that process. And so we ended up receiving the grant award. We got notice of it this past fall, and it was $640,000. So we were one of 4 school districts in the state that received the highest award amount, so that's a pretty big deal. And you can either click on the link or just remember maybe from before that there are some different areas related to the GEAR grant. You had to, of course, meet, it's a grant, so you had to meet certain criteria. But the 4 areas that we chose to focus on were youth and child mental health first aid training for K-12 classroom teachers. And so that is a one-day, typically a day-long training that is not, it's kind of important to say what it's not. It's not about becoming a mental health professional. It's not about knowing exactly what to do with kids when they're in crisis, but it does help provide you a toolbox, strategies, and best practices when you are interacting with students, as our teachers do on an everyday basis, that may be in crisis or may share some concerns with you. And so that you have just the appropriate level of awareness as a teacher, a building administrator, to know some best practices, and that's why they call it first aid. It's sort of like how would you respond in kind of a first aid sort of way, just like if you think about other physical ailments that you come across, like I might not be a nurse or a doctor, but I am going to respond to this kind of in the moment appropriately. And so that's what this is about as well. And so the grant funds teachers to attend the training. We are in the midst of arranging some dates yet this summer to get that started. And then we'll continue it through the next summer for sure, and we'll see how many people take us up on it. And then we might have the funds to continue it the year after as well. We're doing it in the summer because of the sub shortage issue. For sure, this past year, we knew we couldn't, provide opportunities for that. And we'll see what happens in the, coming year if there's great opportunities for that.
How many do you think we'll get?
How many trainings?
What kind of capacity do we have?
I know that we have spaces. Kareen's working on this more specifically, but we aren't providing the training because you have to go to train the trainers to be able to provide the training. And so we're working with our established partners, community, and I think UAY, and might be Child Serve in Fort Oaks. They've got different trainers, and I think this summer we're hoping we're going to start with offering it to high school teachers first, and maybe up to 200 spots this summer. It might be slightly higher than that, but I'm giving like a low number just in case I don't want to ballpark it too high. And it's optional, knowing that, here we are, everyone is still, working very hard. But we do think that there'll be pretty high interest in it. And we also want to kind of do what's manageable this summer and then increase the number of slots and trainers that we have, over the next summer as well. We do intend to bring it down to all of the other grade level teachers as well. We just think that, based upon a little bit of anecdotal data, that the need is greater at the high school. And so we just want to be able to provide, our classroom teachers with this type of training right away.
And would we get to the point where we have some folks who are trainers on staff? So moving forward,
we might. Yeah, we talked about that, and Kareen would probably be able to tell you like what kind of a commitment that is, or but the grant, we do have a little flex money in the grant where we could pay for some people, and that's always a really great thing to do as long as you kind of think that person's going to be around for a while, so that's another thing that we have such strong partnerships with some of those community agencies that we also know they'll always have someone trained. So it's a little bit of, but we do think it's a good idea to do that. We just haven't really decided if that's for sure the way to go. And then other parts are to provide training, which is assist training. That's more specific suicide prevention training for our school counselors, our SFAs, and school nurses. They certainly already are well trained, but this is just additional training for them to all have consistent training. So it's kind of like if you think that the mental health first aid training is for the first responders, kind of the classroom teachers, then the assist training is for the people then once they're referred to them or brought to the nurse's office, or they take it deeper and handle the situation and know specifically what to do. And then we have some funding for wraparound support services. That's more for students and families. And so we talk a lot about the need for when students are having a hard time at school, therefore that sometimes and often means that families are having a hard time as well. So what are some wraparound services for the entire family? And that can be where if we're working with one of our community partners, they continue to work with the family outside of school about, and it can be a whole host and range of things. But so more funding for that. And then just some additional funding to cover the cost of mental health services for students who are underinsured or just don't have insurance at all, which we already provide that, but it's just to provide more. So those are the 4 focus areas of the GEAR grant. And then suicide prevention and awareness. We had put just a little information in there about some of the efforts that we put forth earlier this year. We know that suicide prevention and awareness, just focusing on it 1 week is not sufficient, and so there were some additional ongoing student groups that Corrine and Lindsay met with, just to hear from them about. We sent out information to our student body, our high schoolers, after the lessons, the universal lessons during that week, and said what resonated with you, what didn't, what worked, what do you think we should be doing better? And we got some really rich, of course, as we would expect from our students, information. So we plan to continue to provide some prevention and awareness lessons and resources for staff as we move forward. And then the mental health work group that Superintendent Degner recommended that we get started. The update about that at this point in time is we'll have our second meeting with a core group that will serve on the mental health work group this Friday, actually. But when we got started with it in April, we identified a mix of some school, district staff, as well as some partner agency and community stakeholders to serve as a group of 10 people to serve as what we're kind of referred to as our core group. Our intent is then that core group will help us with some of the tasks that we've got embedded down there below, just providing leadership to the overall process, brainstorming ways to reach all stakeholders, gathering feedback, and establishing recommendations. And so we've got people, just a gamut of people anywhere from the social services of Johnson County to a school counselor at the high school level from one of the schools, just a good combination and mix of people that can provide us some good feedback and input. And then our intent is to be able to identify through looking through the lens of that SEL curriculum review, the school counseling program review that I referred to earlier. We think that that really needs to kind of feed into this mental health work group to make sure that we're not working in silos or doing all this work, separate. And so we want to make sure that the work group has a good understanding of what those recommendations are, so that they can maybe help leverage and facilitate some of that. And then also with the GEAR grant, just the grant focus that I just described, that's work that's already underway. So we need to make sure that we're implementing that with fidelity, and that using this mental health work group to help. I mean, it's our job to oversee it, but they can help us, ensure that happens, or challenge or push us to think of new and different ways to provide some of those supports. And what our intent is then through the work group is to have the core group meet monthly, and then to have focus areas. So we may have, for example, a small group focus on some oversight of those recommendations from the SEL curriculum review and the school counselor program review, to just help us see how are we maintaining and strengthening those areas that we said that needed to be put into action steps from that process. Are we continuing to strengthen our partnerships with those community partners that I referred to with the GEAR grant, for example? We may have another small group that works on policies, procedures, practices, but that is all, I'm sure I'll be providing more updates, but that's all to be determined after the next meeting with our core group, as we provide them a little bit of foundational information to know, be a little bit of a repeat this Friday of what I'm sharing with you all, so that they feel well equipped of here's what we've got in place. Now, using their knowledge and expertise and different stakeholder perspective, what can they recommend that we do to continue to move forward? And so I believe that is kind of the summary of where we're at this point in time. I'm sure there's some questions or ideas that have sparked, and so let me know what your, what's on your minds and what we can talk about further.
I did have a question about the first part that I didn't ask about the SEL curriculum for the high school.
Yeah.
How is that, how is it delivered in what setting and individual classes?
The intent is that it would be delivered during the advisory or homeroom time. I can't speak specifically for how West is implementing it. I know that that's what they had planned on doing. So our goal is to be able to have either schools trying out their own curriculum and doing a pilot year next year and just having more of a robust implementation of it being taught and delivered. And to be really clear that, you know, these lessons are quick little mini lessons. They're not intended to be like the full length of a lesson and take a lot of lesson planning. It's intended to be more conversational based and, you know, facilitating some activities that promote social emotional learning. So the intent would be that there'd be some consistency across the grade levels in the delivery and the use of the resources. And I think that that's, you know, what West had probably planned on doing. I'm not sure that you know, that they were able to implement it the way that they had hoped.
So, do we have some notion about the numbers of students that would seek out, tell someone that they want to participate in some of these elements? Or would be referred to half the student body, 25%, or is it impossible to say?
Do you mean, Charlie, if they would initiate getting help from a teacher or a staff member?
Yes.
For mental health issues,
or convert, or, you know, talk to some other student, and that's, you know, those students do, you know, get together and ask the same question. But yeah, the general idea is, you know, our students are going to seek this out, so, and how many are there? We get correspondence from parents that basically say we don't have a social emotional learning program.
Mm-hmm.
And that clearly is not correct.
Right.
But is that might be because there are so many students that
Well,
want this, or am I going up the wrong?
I think it might be hard to identify the number. Laura can, you know, correct me where I'm wrong here, or add some more to it. But like if you look at that screener where Laura talked about that in there, so 84% of our students identified as low risk, 14% some risk, 2% high risk, right? So we're most likely looking in that 16%. And then I think what you're kind of asking, Charlie, is okay, how likely are those students to then ask for help or seek help or somebody else to advocate for them, particularly in that circumstance? I think some of the feedback Laura shared with me that they got from the students is some of that, you know, just going to an adult and saying, hey, I need help, isn't necessarily going to be their first option, or cold calling one of those resources. So I think that's got to be part of this workforce group is, okay, well then what are the ways we can connect kids to services when they need it? Because we do know they talk to their friends, right? I mean, a lot of times the friends are aware beforehand. And so again, that upstander piece she was even talking about through the MVP programming is important, but our continual challenge is figuring out how do we get them the most comfortable to connect with services when they're in need of it, or when they're aware one of their friends is in need of a service. So the best scope I think we could give you is probably looking at that SEL screener data to kind of talk about the size of the challenge, and then making those links to the appropriate students is I think part of the ongoing work.
and we do have information. I mean, part of a healthy multi-tiered system of supports is data-based decision making. So I appreciate what you're asking, because we do expect, and it's routine, that our student and family advocates, our SFAs, our counselors, which are typically the two personnel groups that our students are going to go seek some help from, school nurses as well, or share something, you know, that they're struggling with. aside from their classroom teachers that they see every day, all day. But, if they're gonna get out of that classroom setting and say, I'm feeling whatever, or I need some help, it's probably, there's a whole host of other positions, but we do, ask that our counselors and our SFAs, and I know the nurses have a protocol for doing this as well, of course, to either anecdotally or formally document those types of conversations and services that they have with students. Now, there's always a gray area that if you just have a one-on-one supportive conversation with a student, you might not document that, but if you're going to provide, some level of intervention or support or recommend, some service outside of the school or call the family to say, hey, I talked with so-and-so today and they shared, this with me, and I wanted to let you know there are these resources that I can help connect you with, those types of conversations. So, but to be able to put an in on it, or like how many students seek that out, it would be, we have some formal information, but we just use it internally for planning because we would, that's not something we widely share out.
I think maybe what we could ask is, so if I have a student at City High, how would, there's two ways to exhibit how this all functions. So if a student like my daughter is at City High, where will she encounter, how will she encounter mental health support throughout a normal day? So that would be one thing I would like to know. And then the other thing I would like to know is, as a guidance counselor, how does a guidance counselor encounter students every day to find out who that guidance counselor can help? And so if my daughter walks around and looks like she's doing okay, where are the checks? I understand there's a screener. How busy are our guidance counselors? Is there a regular check that happens with a certain class every semester that you end up hitting each kid at one point or another? If the kid wants to be exempt, that kid can exempt oneself, but otherwise, is there that opportunity? I guess what I'm saying is, I understand what all of this is, but none of it helps me understand what happens in the school. And if I asked my daughter, she'd probably say, I don't know either. And she's now almost finished with her freshman year. And I have guidance counselors that tell me what happens in the school, and it's amazing what they're doing. So I'm not suggesting they're not working all the time. But what's the system of contacts for both
add on
sides?
to that too, like, for instance, how many teachers are opening up their classes with circles per se, something like that. Like, what does their typical day look like?
What I would say is those might be some really great questions to hear from building-based staff about, and I don't want to be their voice sitting at this table, because I think that would be a little disingenuous. So I think it would be, it's a great question to be able for us to examine, but to get an authentic response. I can tell you what we intend and provide support and direction for the most part, what it looks like. But there could be a mismatch with that, because building staff may say, yeah, that's what we want to do, but we have a hard time doing that because of X, Y, or Z. And so my first, response back to what would your daughter or anyone else's student, child have an experience like is, the intent is that those relationship building opportunities are occurring in the classroom through what they're continually doing on their own, as great classroom teachers, but then also what they're learning, through those professional development. So, maybe a teacher that she has this year used a 2x10 strategy and had a conversation for 2 minutes with her for 10 days in a row to build a relationship. Maybe, that, and just taking that as one little slice out of our professional development. So that could be a way that they're impacted. I would say that our school counselors have, if I were to try to speak for them, I think they would say that they have a lot of course scheduling and a lot of other duties and responsibilities that they are constantly in need of taking care of. And they might feel as though they are responding a lot to situations rather than, working on those proactive relationship building connections and having a set time where I'm gonna check in with this group of students, or we're gonna pull a small group just to have them share, how's it going? What's school like for you? And so I know, because they do tell us that they don't have enough time for those types of relationship building, connecting, and check-ins. That doesn't mean that they aren't doing extremely valuable services throughout the day, like you're saying.
And I have no doubt
Yeah.
about that, just so you know.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm understanding that I didn't really appreciate is that the teachers, this is being shared, this responsibility is being shared by the teachers being engaged in whichever kind of program or, professional development strategy they've gotten comfortable with. A teacher can choose to do it, and every teacher is encouraged to use one. What I'm asking for is like, especially as we're looking at higher liability schools, what are we doing? Where's the your recommendation is to do one of these 4 strategies on this many days of a month, or
Sure,
yes, that's what we do.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is we're building the system as we go along, right?
Okay.
And so staff are being trained in professional development strategies how to do that. We know our staff is great and they try to build relationships with kids anyways, but I think what we're learning as we go through this mental health issue is that everybody has to be great at it, right? I mean, we need everybody doing the job's way too big to assume our guidance counselors can get to every kid that's going to have an issue or to be aware of every kid that has an issue. So we start to put strategies in place. We do PD training, uplift everybody that this is an important effort of just what you do as an adult in the building, and here's some intentional ways to do it when you're not as comfortable or maybe those skills aren't as natural to you, right? Mr. Shutt's skill set to do that's going to be completely different than a brand new teacher, right? And so those are varying degrees of success in being able to build those relationships. Then we have to have a way to look at aggregate data, right? That's the screener. And I think, as much as we talk about the mental health crisis and some of our increased awareness around it, from a screening data perspective, 80% of our students being identified as low risk, that makes us actually feel pretty good about where a tier or core would be. 80% is always kind of the benchmark. But we've also said we don't really have a tier or a tier 1 or a core at the high school. So that's another thing we're trying to work in, is to say, okay, well now we need a base level strategy to get to everybody to deliver a curriculum component to our kids, right? And that's still a part we're working on that needs to get there. So then I think we start to talk about what do we do from an intervention basis when we have the 14% that are some risk or 2% high risk, or somebody moves out of the low risk to all of a sudden an episode or something happens in their life that changes. Then how do we intervene in those situations? And so those would be some of the different things that are more of the tension grabbers, right, around the community mobile crisis response, or the things we've been trying to do with NEST when kids do self-report and some of those items. And so it's all about building out those structures and systems, and I think that's what you were kind of asking, Maka, is like, okay, where is my kid going to feel this? Well, they should feel it through a lesson, right? Eventually through an advisory time or through an SEL lesson. They should have teachers trying to build relationships with them. And then if there's an issue, right, I mean, those would be the things that we're probably a little bit more familiar with when stuff goes really wrong. How do we intervene and deal in those situations? So
Can I take a stab at it
That's exactly
too?
what I was asking you guys. That's what I needed to understand better. And it's my fault I didn't understand it. I just didn't understand where we were on the process.
yeah.
Right? I'm so glad we're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to what Matt said, that there are so many effective practices that teachers are implementing in the classroom that maybe, invite that student who doesn't typically talk to share something. And it might be something that we provided in PD. It doesn't mean that we have all the answers, or it might be something that they just know works with that student or that group of students. And so by doing that, that makes a social emotional learning connection, because that student is like, oh, this teacher values what I have to say and cares about me. And so I might feel more comfortable doing that tomorrow. So sometimes we talk as though these SEL strategies are like these certain specific things, because they are and they can be, while also it's just good relationship building and interacting and just seeing people as individuals within a community. And so that is, as I'm picturing, I'm your daughter walking through the halls, it can look like a range of interactions, and different things work for different students. And so that's where, you know, our teachers just become proficient because they're skilled at knowing what might work for, you know, this student to connect with them isn't necessarily going to work with, you know, another one. And that's a little bit of that personalized learning that's connected to the social and emotional learning. But when we think about, you know, teachers are constantly, whether they think of it through this lens or not, but the competencies, so we have standards and competencies in math and social studies and science and all the content areas. The broad ones for SEL are self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship building skills. And then within those are discrete other types of skills that is a little bit like, it's our curriculum, it's just not part of, you know, directly a part of Iowa code. But it is part of what we know to be good instruction and what we know to be just developing good human beings. And so what I think, I often think of things from a universal level and then a tier 3 level, and what I heard you saying is like, what's happening in the classroom and every day walking in the hallways or arriving to school, how are those social and emotional opportunities occurring, and then how are our support staff kind of coming at it from an individual basis, like checking in and making sure that, you know, as one student in a high school of how many? I can't remember how many city that has.
1,500.
Yeah, that they're seen as an individual and also part of a community.
I'd like to take a stab at it too. So when I think about whether we come to all of you and talk about the academic side of a multi-tiered system of supports or the social emotional behavioral side, which of course the mental health fits in, we've got to anchor all of our thoughts back to those 3 tiers. And so Laura's already spoke to it, Matt's already spoke to it. So the PD that we've done around culturally responsive teaching, the 6 effective classroom practices, whether it's PBIS implementation, all of that is to support tier 1. And then we have tier 2 interventions and tier 3. Well, how do students receive tier 2 and tier 3 supports? And this is our challenge at the secondary. I would just be super transparent and say we are in much better shape at the elementary having this off the ground and implemented than we are at secondary. But we're fully committed to the work and continuing to set aside time and space to work with our secondary teams about this. So how does a kiddo at the secondary level, I can tell you how it happens right now at the elementary, there's in and out criteria. So why does a kid pop up on our radar to receive additional supports? It's because of externalizing behaviors by and large, right? So it's office discipline referrals, it's attendance, it's something's happening that we can outwardly see this is happening. Well, the beauty of the new screener, the SEL screener, is for kids that haven't been on our radar before because they don't exhibit those externalizing behaviors. We can now see who they are and ask ourselves the question, what else do we know about this kiddo that we might need to provide a support? And so those supports look like check-in and check-out modified features, SAGE groups, check-in connect. We've got some mental health supports too that we contract services for that we're trying to match kiddos to those services at the elementary level. That is not up and running and orchestrated super beautifully at the secondary, but that's what we're trying to do. And then if the students are still struggling, they're getting tier 1, they're getting those tier 2 interventions, then we're going to come in alongside them with a tier 3 plan. And that tier 3 plan doesn't mean that there's not some components of those tier 2 interventions happening. It's just much more individualized and tracked. That's happening again, and much more deeply implemented at the elementary level, but that's our goal, and that's how I see this all kind of fitting together. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I think about it, always anchoring it back to our MTSS triangle and where these pieces fit in there.
Yes, all that. I think the hard part, I think, for folks, and the hard part for me is like, I'm going over those 5 things real deliberately every single day with only tier 3 kids, right? Like, and even then the top of that group. And so I'm immersed in that. But I'll tell you that when I did this, right, so in School Connect, that's my particular curriculum that I have used for a long time. However, we think like, well, where is this going to be taught? And then when people say advisory, I know what I think is like, sure. Like, I've seen things taught in advisory, and so I'm skeptical about that. But even more than that, it's more than like I'm going to teach you a lesson. It has to be just the way the school operates, all of the time. So that when teachers see students in the hallway, they're building relationships with those kids. And it's not necessarily that I'm going to teach you perspective taking. I can teach you perspective taking, we can get into that. But the point is, do teachers practice it? Right? Are they doing perspective taking with their students? And then all this also, I think it's really important. Are we being culturally proficient? Because SEL can go super off the rails with kind of white middle class expectations that become just as harmful as lots of the other stuff, right? So one, are we doing that? And just getting our teachers on board to like, this is just how we do business. Like, you greet your kids at the doorway, and maybe that's your way, or maybe you like to do a little sports trivia, because that's, I think the hard part at the secondary level, so I think at elementary it's natural, right? You have one teacher who oversees those kids, and that teacher is going to have that relationship with all those kids. At the secondary level, teachers don't know who has a relationship with that kid, and so that's what I often saw, is some kids have relationships with nobody. Not a single adult in the building, not one. They don't trust them, they don't want to go to them, they're maybe scared of them. So identifying those kids, sometimes I think some of those kids are going to pop up, right? The really hard part, and where we've had the loss, are kids who don't speak out. And they suffer in silence. And they suffer for years in silence, and it looks like they're effortlessly perfect. Everything's, and they're not. And a bunch of those kids aren't with us anymore, right? So that's where I think the screeners really help. And I also think stigma, right? So everything that we can do just as buildings to get rid of the stigma. Signage, things around the room that really highlight this is normal. People feel crummy. You know, teachers navigating that really space of sharing their own vulnerability in an appropriate way. To be like, yeah, me too. Like, sometimes we all have to deal with that. And so, even more important than like nailing down the lessons and trying to hold everybody accountable, because some people are going to be better at this and some aren't. And for some folks, it's going to be way out of their wheelhouse to sit down and teach about a perspective taking or empathy. But hopefully it's not out of anybody's wheelhouse to know how to connect to kids. And not every teacher can connect to every kid, but every kid needs to have somebody that connects with them, some adult in the building. Tracking that, I think, is, I think John did this at City for a while. He put every single kid's name in the school up. And teachers came and identified who they have a relationship with. So that's the type of thing, so you can find those kids are slipping through the cracks. And I'll tell you, through the curriculum review committee, definitely the counselors are like, we don't need to do clerical stuff. We have way too much clerical stuff on our plate, and we want to work with kids. And that was just, and I think that's the profession, right? Which is loud and clear. Like, yes, if there are things that can be done, software can do it. If there are things that can be done, if secretaries can come in and do some more clerical things, and we can free up our school counselors to like be there, and our SFA. I think our SFA is probably, well, I think it depends on the school, frankly. Like, how much guidance counselors do counseling, how much they do other things. But again, I think that I want those folks to do, you know, what they're trained to do. And if somebody else can pick up that, the just, you know, day-to-day, the clerical stuff, pass that off to somebody and free up our folks, free them up. And I do think we're going to need more, right? I just think the more, you know, it is there, especially the, you know, the twos and threes, you know. And then I'll just say this piece that I think also, and I know Corinne's on this committee as far as what Iowa's doing with the Iowa Center for Mental Health in Schools. And I know one thing I think we need on the tier 3 level is how do we transition kids from hospital to school? And I know school feels that too. And there's logistical things, but boy, to go from being like high intensity crisis for 4 days, just like back to 1,500 kids with no plan is very dicey. And we all, you know, the whole system needs to kind of, and people are having these conversations. So it is really exciting. When I saw this, I kind of had that same, I'm like, how would a kid navigate this? How do I navigate? I mean, it's so much.
Well, this was an update for adults. I want to be clear.
Yeah.
If this wasn't for, this isn't how the supports and services hopefully are described or delivered to the student body.
I'm sure. I think it is a lot because it is a lot. And I think you're right. We haven't ever done this before as a district. And so now we have to take all these maybe disparate things and find a way to to get it where it talks nicely to each other. And I don't know if I personally don't know if it matters if West High uses one thing and Tate uses another, but hopefully, one, it's all culturally responsive, right? That one. And two, it's using the same language, the same kinds of things, so that across the board, we do have that. But it's,
Yeah. My thought was that it is a lot. I mean, I tried to go through all of this, and each document had multiple embedded documents and multiple embedded documents within those, like this is infinite loop of documents. And I wondered, like, how do our educators internalize and digest all of this and utilize this, and do we know, like, what are the most important things? And I agree with JP about, the we just need to normalize this. And actually, we had a parent email us recently praising the nest rooms, and how even if your student never goes in and uses that room, just the fact that it's there, just that they know it is there, and that other students are utilizing it, and that and its existence tells the students that their school and their district view mental health as important.
Yeah.
Just the fact that it is there, and having the conversations, in whatever class, just normalizing it and having this be just a part of our culture, our everyday working culture is so important. I did have one other question though about crisis, how we respond to crises. Again, the cold calling, and how our students might not take us up on those opportunities when we have a crisis. Like perhaps maybe there's an athletic team that was all affected by the same, and how we often just leave it up to, it's a passive approach, kind of, rather than taking them aside and having a focused discussion with them. And I wonder if does that ever happen? Do we ever do more of a focused discussion with some of these smaller groups that have had the same traumatic experience, or do we always leave it up to the passive?
Well, I don't think we leave it up to the passive at all, Jean. I
Okay.
do think that part of I think the point you're trying to make there with the passive is still this difficult nut to crack around, if Amy was talking about those measures, if a kid doesn't filter up through those measures in some way, shape, or form, and they present as they have good relationships, what is our avenue to try to get to them? And it's still through the kids, right? It's still either that kid individually reaching out to us, or the friends feeling more comfortable to reach out to us, but on some link, there's got to be a link to an adult, which goes back to the whole universal part about the relationships building aspect. I think the other stuff about the small groups, after we've had a crisis, I think we really try to wrap around those small groups that are affected by it in a really intentional way, and you guys have seen the messages that went out, or on that board update today, you kind of see that SISM response. So I think, maybe I shouldn't have said not at all, but I think there's two different scenarios at play there a little bit, right? Like when we know we have a group that's been affected, for example, the issue that happened at Mercer Park last night, right? Like, okay, well, they wrapped around that baseball team at City High today and made sure they knew they could contact administrators and counselors that way to try to receive some additional support. The missing link where it ends up more passive is just when we don't know, right? And so how do we continue to try to know more about our kids? And I think that's what all of this is really trying to get at a little bit, because when we don't know, then we are playing from behind,
Yeah.
right? We are waiting.
I guess passive is not the right word, I guess, but I'm just, again, still we're leaving it up to them to reach out, is what I'm saying.
It's an opt-in model for the kids,
Right, yeah.
which is tough.
I just hope
We
the
do
more
have-
people have relationships, they can pick up on some of those things.
And we do.
Well, yeah, I just think that's, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but I think it's a little different. It's just a little like dangerous language to talk about it that way, right? Because I think we are trying to do multiple entry points to the kids. It's just when they don't take those. So I think maybe the way we need to try to remember to talk about it is what are all those entry points we can do to the students, right? Because if we give the impression the kids have to opt into it, I don't think that's true. I think we have teachers trying to build relationships. I think we have counselors pulling people in. I think we have great awareness We have screening data that shows, so there's all those entry points, but it doesn't mean we're gonna catch every circumstance. And so what we need to continue to do is build as many of those entry points to our students as possible, because if it is left to an opt-in, or if it is left to, they seek us out, that's when we know we have problems. And so part of the gamut has to be creating as many of those as possible, so. It's just hard, right?
Is
I mean,
there
it's,
anything like
yeah.
what we just did with the every town gun safety smart thing? I wonder if there's any, because there is information, like here's one piece of information that I wouldn't necessarily think about. Does your friend have your parents' phone number? Because a lot of times that's what, I only contact them through Facebook or Messenger. But a lot of times, right, a kid will reveal to a friend, and then that friend doesn't really know where to go or who to call or have any resources. And that could be just something like on a sign or, just kind of a reminder in messaging. So I wonder if there's anything like that we can do out there that's even packaged. It's just like, here's the 5 things you should know, and it's just kind of all over the school. Again, another entry point for that kid who might just happen to look up and pay attention to that poster at that time and be like, oh, yeah, I should do that.
I saw when I was at North Liberty for the HRS thing, I don't know if any of the other women use the restroom, but they have a newspaper just for the bathroom. I don't remember what they call it, super cute and funny. But that would be the kind of place
Yeah, right there.
where you will see it. I read the newspaper or whatever, it's this piece of paper they put up.
Or even a QR code on there with.
QR code, right.
Yeah, so we have a work group, right, that's
Yeah.
working on mental health things, like, we're not gonna workshop everything tonight. and
But it's
probably
entry
got
points.
Another minute or two, before we need to give everybody a minute to get ready for a board meeting, so kind of throw it out there for maybe one last thought, question.
I did want to share that there are some school examples of how they teach. We're here, we're the counselors, we're the SFAs, come to us for this. I didn't interpret that that's what this meeting was tonight, to see some school-based examples of how our schools are reaching out to the kids to say, we're here for you. And so hopefully that wasn't the message that's not occurring, because we're aware of a lot of different examples of how they're front-loading that and teaching that and bringing that up during advisory times or, in a variety of different ways.
And the great part about high reliability schools is that'll be what they need to show to us, right? Will that be part of what could be a lagging indicator, is how are you making those connections with kids, and what are the artifacts that you show that that's how your team is operating to build that safe, collaborative, supportive culture. So
City High's pamphlet comes to mind, Laura, that we looked at a little while
Real
ago.
quick question, do we plan on standing up nests at all 3 high school sections?
Yep.
Okay. So maybe next year, I know it's getting to the end of the year, but like an ed committee meeting, it's highlighting something like that. Could be a cool thing to show
Yeah,
us,
that would be
here's
cool.
the example.
That's a nice, happy way to end our meeting, I love it.
Yeah.
So, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.